And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about the truth in working in the watch industry. That's right, at delraywatch.com, where we buy, sell, trade pre-owned watches and some other watches that you might find elsewhere. We learn so much every day in a market that's always changing, and we have a lot of connections here with those dealers that are in other parts of the industry, and we have a lot of interesting conversations and also shared and mutual experiences about the watch industry and what goes on in it. And I am here today to share this with you, and I hope that you find it incredibly insightful and interesting, because that's what we do. That's what I aim to do, is share insider information about the watch industry. And thank you so much for coming back for another episode. I really do appreciate it. Please do not forget the thumbs up, like, and subscribe. It really does go a long way. On the wrist today, I have the Rolex 1601 with the diamond bezel. Wearing this here for the holiday season just to kind of spice it up a little bit. Interesting take on a vintage watch. So let's get right into it. And by the way, I'm going to go down the list by type of watch dealer or watch business and tell you a little bit about the ins and outs of that specific industry, because if you want to get into the watch industry, it does make a lot of sense to get your teeth kind of sharpened at one of these places. So right away, the first place is your local authorized dealer, or even a chain authorized dealer like something like Tourneau. So when you work for an authorized dealer, you're really pushed to sell what's in the case. While you can do custom orders, really primarily the job that you'll have is selling what's inside of the watch case. So whatever's on the floor, if someone walks in the door, and in 2019 and almost 2020 now, retail, in my opinion, is really dying. And online is where it's at. We're only online here at Del Rey. But nonetheless, if you work in an authorized dealer, primarily you're going to be working with the foot traffic, working with them, and also providing some level of luxury experience. Here's the thing, with online and websites always having the best prices, needed to be the most competitive and price conscious, really, authorized dealers are now starting to provide luxury experiences. So you have to kind of do a little bit more hand holding, deal with a lot more kind of tire kicking, but it can be a very interesting place to learn the psyche of the luxury consumer and the luxury watch consumer. And that takes us into boutiques, right? So the authorized dealers are usually, they're going to be third-party owned, but there might be a boutique inside of an authorized dealer that's co-funded and co-branded, where the authorized dealer runs the boutique on behalf of the brand. And the boutiques are typically funded or owned by the brand, something like you would see in the Design District or Bal Harbour here in South Florida. So when you work for a boutique, it's a lot different of an experience for someone, and you deal with a lot more different types of clients, right? When you deal with boutiques, you're not always dealing with the most budget conscious shopper. You're dealing with someone that really comes there for that experience. At least that's what I'm told in the experiences that I have going into the boutique. So to give an example, if you work for the Breitling boutique in the Aventura Mall here in South Florida, they have a full menu of foods and snacks and alcohol and beverages, and really the customers, they do need a little bit of hand-holding, but the boutiques are generally mono-branded. So someone walks in the door, oh, it's a Breitling watch. You don't need to know every model out there, whereas if you work for an authorized dealer, you have many labels, or if you work for some of the other gray market or pre-owned dealers, there are so many models, and you just need to know a lot of them, because everyone comes in wanting different things. So when you work for that boutique, you just need to know the brand, and you need to know it very well, and it's a luxury experience for the customer. So once again, very sales-driven, sales-focused, but the boutiques now are really modeling themselves as being kind of like a showroom as well as a brand advocate, where you can walk in to a boutique like the Breitling boutique, for an example, and you can feel and understand fully what the brand is about, with the airplanes, the aeronautical, that whole thing, a very guys, manly kind of brand, I would say, compared to some of the other brands on the market, to give that example of Breitling. So that's what the boutique is all about. Very cool, interesting place, but typically you see people that work at boutiques jumping around a lot, when certain brands get hotter than others and they're very financially driven. And also people tend to get really worn down and want to start working more into corporate or into a place where they can kind of expand, because at the boutique, you really are pigeonholed into that kind of brand and whatever the brand tells you to do. Now, when you work up kind of the chain, you can get into distributors. Some brands, they use distributors, and the distributors are basically a company that just does that. They distribute watches from the manufacturer to authorized dealers, predominantly in places that are full continents or in the United States, for example. So let's say you are a quorum distributor, for example. Your only job is to make sure that authorized dealers place orders with you, bulk orders. You need to move pieces. When you're a distributor, it's less about the passion behind watches and more about the numbers. How many pieces, how many units? It's not even how many watches, it's just a number. How many units did you push out the door last month, and how many will you do next month? That being said, some distributors, or some people that work for distributors, can have an incredibly lucrative time there. But if watches are your passion, I would kind of give you really some advice to stay away from the distributors, because it will take a lot of that passion away from you as a watch guy and a watch buff. I see out in the industry some distributors we talk to, and really, watches are not even in their top of mind. It's really just about the numbers, how many I did this month, next month, and will they keep their job in the future. So distribution's very interesting, but it's a whole nother ball game in and of itself. Moving on to the brand. Let's say you worked for a boutique and you wanted to move up a little bit, and you wanted to get into something that's more your forte. Perhaps you're a media person. Perhaps you are business, technology, software development. Well, you can start working for the brands in some capacity. While a lot of brands and a lot of Swiss brands do shop a lot of things in their wheelhouse out to more companies that specialize in technology, web development, this and that, there are a lot of opportunities at brands where you can have still a passion for watches, but convey it in a little bit different of a way. The brands don't really necessarily have these full sales teams like that you would see with a distributor, or even getting into some of the corporate, but still they do some of that. Not all the times are there distributors, depending on the brand. Sometimes the brands do sell directly to the authorized dealers, so there can be some sales-driven, numbers-driven aspects of working for a brand. But generally speaking, my understanding from everyone I talk to that has or does currently work for the brands in the brand offices is that it's a little bit more of what you would think it to be. It becomes a lot more marketing, a lot more business, but yet you still have that luxury feel. There's typically a little bit more of a laid-back environment compared to a very high sales-driven environment, especially if you're working in creative. But think of any company, any large company, they have those jobs at the brand level, and if you're passionate about certain brands and watches or watches, you can get into some of the brands and have an incredibly enriching experience working with watches in that capacity, and not have to always be numbers sales driven, where you would see at something like some ADs and some boutiques and distributors. And next, kind of rolling up in that hierarchy, you have the corporate shells, right? You have Richemont, you have Kering, you have Swatch Group, and you also have LVMH with Zenith, Tag Heuer, and Hublot. So what you have is you have these corporate shells, publicly traded company, and it's a little bit more removed from the watches, even more so than working for the brands. So with the brands, you're still working very closely with the watches, but when you work for these corporate shells like the Richemonts, you're really looking at more strategy, more big picture thing, more corporate governance, finance, some technology aspects, but a lot of process-driven things, a lot of automation, and these are the things that are really plaguing, or really not necessarily plaguing, maybe if you dread these types of things, but also really just companies are faced with these big topics and decisions today in terms of business strategy. So when you work for a company, you're going to be having higher salaries, but there's going to be more difficult things to work on, and many people do enjoy that, right? So if you like the big picture technology, you like the business, the financial aspects, lots of financial people work for these corporations that own and operate at a high level all of these smaller brands, that's really the place to be. So you don't necessarily need to be a watch geek or a watch buff to work for something like a Richemont, but knowing the watch industry is incredibly important. And if you do want to kind of have that watch passion at arm's length and not necessarily get beat up by it every day and sometimes lose that passion, right? Because out there, for the people that do sometimes work for the Richemonts, the Kerings, the LVMHs, they lose some of that passion because it becomes much more financially driven, much more process driven, and that's not necessarily what the watch community is about, right? That feeling. So that's something interesting to keep in mind if you're thinking about applying to a company like the Richemonts of the world. Now, crossing on the other side of the line. Now, I like to say that there's two sides of this imaginary line that I'm really just creating here for you today. You have kind of the brands and everyone that's closely connected and friendly and works with the brands in all capacity and really governed by the brands and the companies that run and control the brands. And on the other sides, you have the rogues, right? You have the online forum flippers. You have the gray market. You have people like Del Rey Watch. You have the companies that really strive to innovate and bring new, interesting, and exciting things to the market, not because only they like to do it, because I love to do it, and so do many other people's on that side of the line that I know, but also because it's required, right? We're not producing JLC watches. We're not producing Panerai watches. We work with what we are given and what's out there and what's available to us. So it's a little bit different of a ball game. Now, first you have the online forum flippers. You can make good money, especially good side income money from being a forum flipper. There's courses out there, and also there's just people that learn by doing it, right? You buy one thing lower, you sell it higher. So if you see a really good deal on a Panerai, I know of one particular guy who will go on the Real Reel, which is a consignment website, every day. He pays for the extra membership. He goes on there every day. He finds the lowest price watches, and then he'll sell them to either dealers or on the forums, and he'll make a few dollars here or there, and it's fun for him. It's exciting. He's getting his feet wet in the industry, and also he's making some side income, whereas he has, an actual career as well. So something interesting, but the forum flippers can make some pretty decent money, especially at larger scale or at bigger margins. Now, that's that, but moving into more of the dealer, more formal, more solidified, right? You have pre-owned dealers, you have gray market dealers, and there is some distinction between them. Typically, the gray market dealers, they're selling watches that are unworn, and they're usually buying them from companies like the brands and the distributors. And what they don't tell you is that when these brands or distributors have too much inventory, they sell them at huge margin discounts to these gray market dealers. Sometimes they throw away the warranty cards so no one knows. And that's kind of how you see all these new watches floating around at much bigger discounts than the brands will ever give the consumer directly. Though I'll say that in the coming year, I did another video about this, I think we're going to see a big tackle on this in the investor relations documents of some of the brands like Richemont and Swatch. You see verbatim that they are starting to work on cutting back on these large discount watches that are floating around because they're starting to sell direct to consumer. So something to keep in mind. That's what it's like. But working for a gray market dealer is a whole nother ballgame, right? You have to know all the watches on the market. You have to know all the discounts that are available from the brands. You have to know everything about proper timekeeping, maintenance. People will call in, especially if you're working sales or customer service for a gray market. People will call in and they'll ask you the most obscure questions about, what is the millimeter size of the top pusher on this Maurice Lacroix watch? And, people will expect an actual response to that. So that's something you need to keep in mind when working with a gray market. There's a lot of watches out there, and throughout the history of time, there's so many. So unless you really do have a passion and you love it and you're willing to invest that time learning the models every day, gray market might not be the best place for you, but it can be really fun for a watch geek, as well as pre-owned dealers. Now, a lot of authorized dealers are starting to get into pre-owned. I'll say there are companies like Richemont who own Watchfinder that does pre-owned that are starting to fight a little bit on some of the authorized dealers that do dabble in pre-owned, but nonetheless it's here for now, And if you like working in pre-owned, once again, a lot like the gray market, it can be a lot of fun and it can be rewarding both financially and also as a watch geek, kind of scratching that itch, because today you might get a Richard Mille through the door, tomorrow you might get that literally any watch can float through the door. You get micro brands, you get vintage Rolex, you get modern Rolex, you get things that just came out today, things that came out 30 years ago, like the Omega Speedmaster Mark 40. So watches from all different types, places, dollar amounts just come flying in, and it can be extremely fun and once again financially rewarding. And if this is something you're very interested in the comment section and in the description below, there's a link where you can sign up, and you should sign up only if you are committed and you do want to get your feet wet in the watch industry. There's an apprentice program that I'm working on. It's going to be very exciting, a lot of great content, a lot of exclusive content with industry veterans and professionals where you can actually learn the watch industry for real, and also how you can make money in the watch industry at any level, but only if enough people sign up. We have a couple hundred people right now, but only sign up if you are very interested and committed, because it will be a lot of work to learn this for you. Okay guys, so what do you think about this? Do any of you out there work for any of these companies? I would love to hear your feedback and also what you have to chime in below in the comments. I really do appreciate it. The thumbs up, like, and subscribe, it goes a long way. And of course, you can find me on Instagram, The Real John P. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.